Yeah, so thanks very much for coming this morning. And as I said, we're going to cover quite a few different methods of earning a high income, really with a lifestyle type of business. And we'll give you quite a few examples between Dave and I of generating a high income, usually with high margin products or deals or transactions. It's quite a relaxed presentation. So you know David, obviously, and as you know, I'm Des. These are some of the key points we're going to be talking about today. Very straightforward, multiple ways to increase your income. How many of you in the room, by the way, are mainly property income based or focused on property? Okay, so are you, just to get an idea, are you mainly focused on property or other business income as well? Okay. Yeah, so obviously that's Dave's speciality. And so what I'll be doing is really showing additional opportunities for making money, even if it's, it could include business transactions or say possibly property portfolio type of transactions with Dave's input. Any questions from that? And as I say, it's not necessarily a seminar or a talk. I'm not a guru or an expert in presentations and so on. The main focus is really helping many of you, ideally all of you, get to your goals in the most direct way. So we're going to cover a few exercises, and it'd be great to have more of your input as well. So let's make it more interactive rather than me talking for the next 3 hours or 30 hours or whatever. And at the end of the presentation, we've got detailed reports for all of you as well. Yeah. All these. This is on deal making generally, and this is
property side, yeah.
Focused on property. So if we miss anything, then it's all detailed in there. Now, just to get a little bit more background from all of you, just kind of fire off any points that come to mind. Ideally, what is it you guys are looking for today?
Belief, inspiration.
All right, belief, inspiration. Do you want to make a note of that, Dave?
Yeah, sure.
Just briefly, just an overview, what your expectations are. Someone else? All right. Understanding. Can you write that fast?
We've got inspiration. What else was it? Belief.
What else? Well, we need lots of things, really, because we've got lots of information and content and resources and so on. But it'd be good to get more of an understanding of what more you're looking for. Understanding as well.
Opportunities.
Good opportunities. Like specific strategies or methods, possibly contacts, the phone number to $1 million funding deal.
Exploring. Exploring.
All right.
Exploring. Yeah.
Different options.
All right.
Challenges. Options.
You want more challenges?
Anything else?
What else? Two, three more things.
Kind of step by step of where to start and what steps to take to get somewhere.
All right.
Some real life examples, case studies.
All right.
Oh, you love my presentation.
Yeah, I had to delete a few of the case studies from these, or too many. What else? What would make this day, this morning, really, this presentation, ideal? We've over-delivered, isn't it?
An action plan.
All right.
Contacts.
Good.
Contacts.
Action plan, contact.
Good talk.
I think they're starting to ask too much now.
Running out of room.
What's that?
You've got free money.
Free money.
Yeah, it's on there somewhere.
It's a small print. What else? Just one or two final things. I think we're to the limit. If it was a 2-3 day event, we could probably just about deliver on that. But it's quite
Resources.
resources. Okay. Do you have in mind what type?
Where to find deals, where to look,
All
what
right.
resources to use.
That's Dave's territory.
Yeah.
And one final one.
How to go away and teach yourself.
Teach yourself.
Feed into resources.
All right. Especially with the internet, you're kind of swamped with a lot of this, aren't you? There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of methods and how to use
TMI, isn't it?
Yeah. And after a while, I think there's kind of, from what I've heard with quite a few individuals, it can be like a bit of overwhelm as well.
Yeah,
And
it's like clarity, isn't it?
yeah, stuff starts conflicting.
Know which bits to believe.
There you go.
Yeah.
The stuff that works for you. So if we deliver to even half of this, or maybe all of it, it's a bit of a stretch actually. Maybe with the reports we can cover most of this. But if we do you feel we've over-delivered? And if we have, then can you leave us a testimonial at the end, please? A little bit of background about myself. I'm not a guru or an expert or anything like that, as you probably gathered. This is just a brief snapshot of the last, geez, that's 30 years, Dave.
Reality.
Only answer everything else.
Okay.
So you started when you were 5?
There you go, thank you. Some people wouldn't believe I'm 100.
I'm laughing at the free money.
And quite honestly, I took the slow route in learning a lot of this stuff. So hopefully, one of the best things I can hopefully deliver here today is kind of really the shorter track or the faster track to get to point B, wherever you want to get to. So as I said, I've had a whole bunch of successes along the way. I mentioned some of those as well, but I often find some individuals can't relate to those. So I'll give you a few examples of those, and I openly disclose where I've either slipped up or failed or something didn't work. I know there's some individuals who just give you all the positives, and I always look at what didn't work in order to see, how it could be changed or adapted or refined to achieve a goal. As I mentioned, I took the slow road. It's again, some of the points you guys mentioned here, especially about exploration and adventure and so on. I think I got more caught up in that as I became self-employed in '87 when I was 22, by the way, for your information. So often I took kind of different, what I call side alleys and detours, and often got distracted, which I hear quite often in dialogues and conversations now. And there's so many different, again, so much information, so much knowledge, so much, different ways to do things, especially on the internet. You could often go down a path and then very quickly find it's not suited, it's not that best fit. So in my case, I did take longer than most. Along the way, I had the fortune to meet literally hundreds of entrepreneurs, different business owners, and found really the essence of what worked, what didn't, what made for bigger successes, what made for like lifestyle successes and all this. Fortunately, was able to be involved in a number of businesses, to not just my own, but others as well, to add an extra 6 figures, sometimes an extra 7 figures in their successes. And my speciality, especially in the last 15, 20 years with the rise of the internet, has become more of a specialist in lifestyle type businesses where you can have a high income, but also have free time and have a good lifestyle as well. So it's not like 100 hours a week in the office. By the way, just a quick question. How many times do you think, Dave and I, by the way, have been working together nearly 2 years now. Quick guess, how many times do you think we've met?
Never.
Just to keep quiet, yeah.
3.
Never.
Any other quick guesses?
Two, 3 or 4.
When did we meet?
Never.
Oh, this morning.
Sorry, yeah, lies, yeah.
Today is the first time we met.
Yeah.
And we've been working together for since the beginning of last year.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems a lot longer.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. And based on really working remotely, and some of the points I'll show you as well, but this applies to property or any other type of business, really. I talk about margin and leverage. Working remotely, both of us have been working together, generated extra 6 figures in new business. And that's not, you know, for example, 100 grand with 90 grand going out in expenses and costs. That's not my idea of a business, personally. I talk about very high margin type businesses. So between us, we've been able to generate an extra 6 figures without meeting. And the point is that any of you could do this, especially leveraging with other contacts and other resources. Now, again, I'll cover some of those points. But as I mentioned very clearly there, my focus, especially in the last few years, has very clearly been about high income, low overhead, remote and virtual. I enjoy meeting people, you know, being with people and so on. But I find if you can leverage either databases or contacts or other resources, you can get, you know, you can reach a much wider audience. And many of you guys know that, especially with many of the, say the internet marketing gurus, for example. They have lists of thousands or tens of thousands of people. So that's one example of leverage. Does anyone know what I mean by 90-10?
Yeah.
Quick guess.
Better than 90-20.
Yeah, I refined it a little bit.
You tried it out.
Yeah, that's a good summary, but can anyone clarify what that would mean?
You get 90% of your returns from 10% of your effort.
That's right, absolutely, yeah. So what I focused on, obviously, through that slow journey, long slow journey since 87, but especially in the last, I would say, especially the last 10, 15 years, is a focus on the 90-10. Like you said, what's the core 10% which would achieve 90% of the upside? So with any business or property transaction, there's literally, you know, 30, 50, 100 things you could be doing. But what I look at is what's the top 10 things, possibly even the top 4 or 5 things you could be doing. So as we've been chatting, by the way, what are some of those things in property? What's an example of where a 10% activity can get you a 90% gain? Just very quickly in property.
Deal sourcing.
That sounds good, yeah. Deal sourcing.
That's one, yeah, definitely.
Finance, funding, gets you to being able to do more deals, right?
Yeah.
What else is an example of a 10%? Who's the jet pilot here, by the way? There you go, I thought so. Yeah, what's very briefly, I know it's a different niche, I'm fascinated, is you fly RAF jets, right, Typhoons. What's an example that's an extreme end. What's like a high performance leverage activity from, or result from a small activity? It's got him thinking.
I suppose there are obviously there's thousands of things which go into flying the jet, but you need to be able to, because you only have so much capacity, so much brain power, you need to be able to use what brain power you have and the important things which helps you get from A to B, if you like, you want to speak in these terms.
But what are the core things you need to remember?
Mainly numbers.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, is it one of the core things?
Mhm.
But I've often found, like for example, in our business, when we're specifically when we're talking about different types of transactions and different types of deals, like Dave, what would you say with property broking and transactions? What's the most valuable, or two of the most valuable use of
It's
time?
always speaking to sellers, always. Yeah, yeah. That's where the magic happens. Without the sellers, there's no business. So that's definitely the 10% that turns into 9%. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I call that dialogue. And that's, if you want to make a note of that, that's been, for myself especially, and many of the individuals I know, the dialogue or dialogues has been absolutely crucial in helping them do more transactions, more deals. And that's what I refer to as a 90-10 activity. You always look at points of leverage, points of margin. And these days especially, I'm, as you may have gathered, I'm not a property specialist either. I don't purport to be. Dave is that guy. He's the property guy. I favour, as I call it, light businesses, where basically with this and this, you're running whether a high 5-figure or 6-figure business from any location. I know many of the gurus talk about it, but I've been doing it for the best part of 15, maybe 20 years now. The internet has helped a lot. And personally, I don't have anything against property, but I'm not passionate about it, quite honestly. I'm passionate more about commercial, what I call commercial and business transactions. But having said that, probably about half of my contacts out of hundreds, half of them have made a lot of money in property. They're either millionaires or multi-millionaires in it. But then they often ask me about what's the next thing to get into, because quite often they're looking at additional opportunities, or they could be a little bit bored with property, because after you've had a level of success, it becomes like a cookie cutter kind of model, doesn't it?
I think a lot of them build up that passive income. We come across lots of people wanting a passive income, and it's a bit of a dream once you get to that. They're filling that void then, what they do with the time.
Yeah.
And it's not having that passion anymore, isn't it? So.
Yes, I look at that mix, which is a business you're going to enjoy running and building and so on, and also it's lucrative as well. You've got to get a buzz out of it. The first book I picked up when I was 17. It's it kind of really opened my eyes to the point I made earlier about leverage, about doing more with less. And this guy, the writer of the book, Joe Carbo, I don't know if you can see that on there. He's basically half the book. You can look at it later if you want. But half the book talks about the mindset and the mental discipline, the psychology, and the other half of the book focuses on the mail order business and making money. This was written in the 70s, by the way. So he talks about how to make money from that industry, and he went in the 70s and 80s. He went on to make millions and millions of pounds, basically leverage selling this book and then a whole bunch of others. So what was interesting was, even though I was exposed to that at quite a young age, I loved the book, but guess what? Didn't do anything with it. Took no action. And I took, as I mentioned there, the safe route. I went into accountancy, which I considered very safe. You get to stay in an office, you get paid a nice salary, and but this kind of hunger, this need to want my own business and be my own boss just was there, literally from 17, 18 onward. Along the way, I looked at many opportunities as well. This was in the 80s, by the way. And there were various newsletters going into different kind of opportunities to make money and so on, have your own business, independent lifestyle, but I didn't take action with any of it. I wanted to kind of take, let's say, the safe route. Still wanted my own business, and I took a big chance when I was 22, as I mentioned there. And I'll show you what I did there, and most of it was, as I say, the slow route, but I'll run through it briefly. Just out of interest, a quick show of hands, how many of you have tried, say, over 5 different ways to achieve your goals? I should have started lower, actually. Tried more than 2 things to get to your income goals. What about more than 5? More than 10? All right. As I say, I was fortunate enough to see about 50 of them. I must have tried, must have been 20 or 30 different ways. As I say, it was a slow way. It was a lot of trial and error. You guys are familiar with Think and Grow Rich, right?
Listening to the car on the way out.
You still learn from it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And attended various seminars as well. Again, this was in the 80s. There's a sort of a method and different ways. So it was kind of like a sponge. We'd be wanting to learn. Different ways of the psychology, the mindset, and so on. Wanting to get ahead, wanting to improve things. And I guess I went into what I call continued lifelong learning, obviously, which continues now. I still learn distinctions and what I call points of leverage. It's ongoing. So what I look for is really points of where there's likely to be growth. As I mentioned there, specific processes. In my case, I tend to prefer shorter processes. So not like, as you mentioned earlier, not like hundreds of things to watch for, but maybe what are the 2-3 things that can be done to get to a result. So simpler processes, specific methods, and I call it margin and leverage. By the way, is anyone unclear what I mean by margin and leverage with regard to either property deals or business transactions? Margin, leverage, it's quite clear, right? Quite simple. You've heard of those guys, right? Herbalife and those companies.
Me too.
So that was my early days. I admit it. I went into Herbalife, failed completely. I was embarrassed by wearing the badge, right? Who remembers the badge?
Yeah, talk to me now, whatever it was. Ask me how.
Don't ask me.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I remember that.
It was
But
lose weight now.
Jim Rowan started to present for them, and he was phenomenal.
Right.
Yeah.
With
I saw
Mark
him in
Hughes and
Windsor.
those guys.
Mark Hughes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they must have had like millions of distributors. This guy, who's heard of Herbalife, by the way?
I was in the opposite one at Amway, so
Oh, right. Okay,
Yeah.
similar.
yeah. So
And there's a utility warehouse as well, does anyone remember that?
So, as I say, I tried quite a few things, and most of it I wasn't very good at, to be quite honest, because I found there wasn't really much leverage, especially with, and I find, for example, network marketing, I'm a fan of it in the sense of the training and the people aspect of it, but I think the leverage often is missing because you've got to rely on lots of other people to take action. So you lose that leverage, there's no direct control. Became what I call an apprentice consultant with this chap, Ron Holland. Anyone heard of Ron Holland? He's a writer of a book called Think and Grow Rich. So that was very briefly, that's an example of one of my early points of leverage, which is working with an existing entrepreneur rather than spending more and more time in trial and error. So I started working with Ron. He's about 17 years my senior, so picked up quite a lot. The only challenge was, as I mentioned there, we were doing a lot of mileage, about 1,000 miles a week back. This was in the 80s. Lots of travel. Often visiting poorly qualified prospects. This was for business coaching, business consultancy, and so on. So when you take into account the traveling and the meetings and everything else, it became quite low paid. Who can identify with this? It's a lot of time and energy input for the game. So I kept looking, basically. And along the way, I met James Kahn, actually. You guys have heard of James Kahn, yeah? Although this is when he was starting in the recruitment business, which was Alexander Mann in the late 80s. And even back then, he was a very, very driven, ambitious entrepreneur. And I picked up quite a few things from him. It was tricky to get too much of his attention because even back then, he had literally 100 plus recruitment consultants working in central London. That was the first breakthrough. So if you very briefly understand the timeline, I'll move through even quicker now. So quite a bit through the 80s, but it took me literally into the 90s when I connected with a small team who were promoting Tony Robbins in the UK. And it was a major breakthrough because, as I mentioned there, all the work, and this was a major change for myself in terms of leveraging and working with margin. So all the work was done by phone. There was no need to travel anywhere. It was just done by phone. We were talking to people all across the UK and Europe. And the seminars, by the way, at that time had maybe 1,000 or 1,500 people. Have any of you been on a Tony Robbins seminar?
Three.
A few of you. There you go. Which ones, by the way? UPW, Mastery, or?
UPW Mastery, Sales Mastery, and Wealth Mastery.
Brilliant. You've done most of the package, really. Wait, and yourself?
I've done most of it. I think just what I haven't done Date with Destiny is the only one I haven't done yet.
Yeah, want to do
Right.
that one.
Now, I hear Date with Destiny is one of his main ones now.
Mm.
It was like 6 days.
6 days, yeah.
Yeah, these are like, quite, as you gather, quite long events. Anything from 3 days up to 10 days, right?
Mhm.
I know Life Mastery used to be quite long. I managed to make it all the way to Hawaii, which turned out to be a 3-week stay. And a big seminar, like 1,000 people in a room, a lot more energy than this. You know, and it's not just one speaker, it's like 20, 30, 40 different speakers. You know, and Tony's brilliant. It's just massive energy, brilliant communication, great influence, nothing like myself. But I had a lot of fun with that, and more importantly, it was very, very lucrative because it was better leveraged. I was able to make better use of my time, just spending time on what I call dialogues by phone, and just that distinction in itself increased my income substantially. So coming back to the point Dave made, what's one of the most important activities again, Dave?
Dialogue, speaking to sellers, yeah.
So it's not rocket science, but we find often that, and especially when we're talking with individuals who want to take advantage of this opportunity to want to do deals and so on, we find quite a few individuals get caught up in a lot of the details, the methods, the paperwork, the legalities, and want to know literally not the ABCs, but the A to Z. So wanting to do deals,
Yeah.
they often miss out on the most important point, which is
Yeah.
the dialogue.
It's easy to do it, but it's also easy not to do it as well. Yeah.
I'm interested to know that you say talking to sellers, so do you find buyers are easy to find once you've got a deal?
Yeah, if you've got a good deal, most people on your lists and stuff will take the deal, providing it meets the criteria that we negotiate on. And by working with motivated sellers, you'll always get a good deal, providing you can. We've got various tools in the toolbox to pull out and kind of implement on the deal, really, which I'll be showing in my presentation.
Yes, very quickly I realized that for myself back then, for you guys it may be obvious, what's the big breakthrough here? But the big one was spend more time, not just on a dialogue, but progressing dialogues to possible deals or sales or where there's margin. And as I say, funny enough, the big change that I gained more by doing less. What was I doing less of in this little list, or from everything I've said? What was I doing less of?
Processes.
Say again?
Processes, doing less processes.
Well, I mentioned it there. There was no
Yeah,
travel.
yeah.
I cut out the travel. No 1,000 hours a week. No meetings. And it was just leverage better. And in property, obviously, there's different ways to do that. I know, Dave, you've started to talk more about portfolios.
Yeah, portfolios, that's really good leverage. You're usually dealing with one seller, multiple properties, and you can do a deal. The one we're working on over 20 sellers, 20 properties, you're dealing with one seller, not 20 individuals then, so it's much easier to do a deal and a lot more leverage working on portfolios, and the market is perfect for it right now. So.
Yeah, again, another big point of leverage. For some of you, this may not be important, but the last point I made, to me, it's hugely important to enjoy what I do in order to achieve the income or generate the income. And that's, quite honestly, and I admitted it earlier actually, I'm not passionate about property. Dave is, and I know many of you are as well. There's an old picture. I'm the one on the left. That's. Has anyone gathered which timeline that is?
It's 90s.
I said it earlier. Actually, it was late '94. So I think, fortunately, he hasn't grown, and nor have I. But yeah, absolutely. That's when Tony used to take one-to-one shots with individuals and so on. Now he's got, because the seminars have become so big, Tony's got security to kind of create like space and path for him to move around the seminar room. So I continue to look for more breakthroughs, really, look for more margin, more leverage. Hi there. Kuala Lumpur.
Mohammed.
Oh, hi. We're looking for a guy who's coming from Kuala
Yeah,
Lumpur.
he's not here yet. Yeah.
On a flight?
I don't know where.
Yeah, so these are some of the points of leverage, and as far as I'm aware, these can be applied whether in any business or property. So we've touched on a few of these, which is always look to increase margin, leverage, look to work with one or two others. My example with Dave is a very clear example of that, and I have a few of these deals, not hundreds, but maybe 8 or 10. So Dave and I coming together, working together, we've generated like 1 + 1 is equal to 3 or more as we've worked together. And it's not big rocket science, right? It's quite
It's not been
straightforward.
difficult, yeah.
If it was, you wouldn't be able to do it.
No, that's right, yeah.
I make fun of it on the phone. I say to people who want to make more, because we talk with quite a few people who want to make more money out of property, and often they're complicating it, quite honestly. They've been to 1, 2, 3, 10 seminars or workshops, and they're coming out with a lot of what about this, what about that? And I'm saying, just keep it simple. And often it comes back to the D word, the dialogues. One or two others. Do you understand very briefly the value of why to work with even one or two other individuals, even one other? What's the value of that, very briefly?
Doubles your network and
Yeah.
doubles your experience.
It leads to the A word, which is accountability.
Yeah.
So I don't need to work with him, which is good. You don't need to work with me, right?
No,
But the two of us working together, we're accountable to each other.
yeah.
So more is created. And I know many of the other individuals talk about that, but often we've talked with quite a few individuals who are really, quite honestly, they're trying to get to a property goal or business goal all by themselves. I think you can do it, but I think it's just tougher. But as I say, I know I keep repeating it, I always focus on high ticket, high margin, where for your effort, you're getting a good reward. Now this was a chance meeting with this chap. Is anyone familiar with Dan Pena?
Yeah.
Heard of? Has anyone been to any of Dan's events?
I'm booked on in February.
You're going in February?
Yeah, to his castle, yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So you know Guthrie Castle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you know this, Dan Pena, you could look him up on YouTube. If you're a bit sensitive or whatever, it's, you may want to turn the sound down. But he's very direct. It's just he doesn't mince his words. He's had a huge amount of success. The 400 million, by the way, is understated. I think he now calls himself the $50 billion
That's right.
guy.
Yeah.
When I met him, he was at the $400 million level. Very, very driven, highly ambitious individual. I met him in '95, so it was quite a few years ago when he wasn't even active in the UK. This is a business speaker. He's American, and the 400 million he made taking a company public in which industry was it? Oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so oil and gas industry, quite a boring industry as far as I'm concerned, but Dan sees it as a financial transaction. And in the 80s, he took that company called Great Western Resources public on the London Stock Exchange. I had the fortune to spend, the good fortune to spend a week with him, which was as I say, 6 days of fast business growth. And it's a big shift in my thinking. He talks about just working on much bigger either problems or solutions or goals, and that's one of the ways he was able to reach some of the bigger numbers bigger goals that he reached. I still remember very briefly when I was given that opportunity, both money and time was a real challenge. I thought 10 grand, I mean, where am I going to get this? And it was the absolute wrong time. I was right in the middle of a promotion with a seminar with a guy called Jay Abraham. Who's heard Jay Abraham? There you go. So I was right in the middle of that. It was Jay Abraham's first event in the UK. I'd done a deal with his company, Nightingale Conant, to promote Jay. And long story short, I wasn't given much notice to attend this event, so I thought money is a bit of a stretch back then. I was maybe 30, 31 at the time, and the time was completely, it was completely the wrong time because I was so focused on the J. Abraham event. But I still remember making a very, very clear decision on the phone to their marketing guy. It was a guy called Doug, I still remember it. I was on the phone with him, he was explaining the deal, and he goes, because I was interested in buying the tapes. Remember those things? In the 90s, I thought 10 grand is it is a bit of a stretch, but I'm going to buy these tapes, which back then were £1,000 for these audio tapes with Dan's program on. I was going to order the tapes, but long story short, I got chatting with Doug, their marketing guy, and I was just chatting with him. Internally, I remember making the decision, I'll do it. I didn't say it to him, he would have got excited. I just thought, I'll do it. And it was just an internal decision I made. And as I say, short notice, maybe 5-7 days notice, but I ended up at the castle attending the 6-day event. And it brought a massive breakthrough. It changed my life back then. It was a phenomenal breakthrough. So you're in for quite a treat in February. You probably know that, right? It's quite a shift you go through. And it's not comfortable, by the way. You spend a few days with this guy. It's you know, you're out of your comfort zone. You're thinking on a different level. Your ability to look at deals is on a completely different level. Whatever you're thinking, you typically add an extra 0 or 2 zeros, and then kind of work back into thinking, well, how can I make that happen? And it becomes more believable, and from that greater belief, you're able to achieve bigger goals. And so, as I say, I mentioned, I did a handshake deal with Dan because of my skills, to promote him in the UK. Prior to then, he'd been having just Americans coming over to Guthrie Castle, which is his residence in the UK, to talk about business growth. But he'd just been targeting the US market. I said to Dan, I think there's a market for you in the UK. And Dan said that no way. He goes, the Brits won't stand for this message. Very direct, very dominant. You know, he uses a whole range of swear words, which puts some people off and all this kind of stuff. I said, let's do a test. This was the test. I don't know if you can see me. It is an old photo. You see that? This is, you probably figured out where Dan is, very prominent, red tie in the middle. Just here. I don't have one of those red lighter
I thought that thing I did.
laser things. And there's me. I don't know if I look any older these days. You'd probably say yes. But basically that was the test. Each of these individuals had paid a couple of grand to be there. So the first, I called it a test event. It generated, the whole event generated about 60 grand. And I think I was one of the first to prove Dan wrong. He'd actually written off the UK market. But most of these are Brits, and we had maybe 4 or 5 different countries represented: Austria, Switzerland, and a few other countries. People had flown in from all over to come to London to learn about business growth, and this was a 3-day event. We went on to run quite a few of these, and again, it was I'm saying that not to impress you, but it was a further example of leverage, because what I focused on was then promoting at £2,000 and then £10,000. So you don't need to do too many of those transactions to make a good income. And we had literally hundreds of these, and different individuals come through these programs. So directly or indirectly, I've really focused on where an extra 6 figures or 7 figures could be added. so whether I can help the individual or whether I can connect that individual with someone else to help generate a big result. One of my biggest successes, you guys are familiar with Inside Track?
Mhm.
Who's heard of Inside Track? Who's heard of good things? I won't go down that track. But I was, so whether good or not, I helped Jim launch Inside Track in 2001 when he was just getting started. And back then he was saying, Des, you know, I've got this seminar, I want to market at £5,000. I said, how many have you done, Jim? And he goes, none. But he'd heard of my reputation, especially with high ticket items and high ticket programs. So he said, you know, what's the best way to launch this, which happened to be Inside Track and those property investment seminars. So I showed him literally a blueprint, which turned out to be literally a one page, like an outline of how he could, I don't have the outline here, but just like a one page on how he could launch the events and have attendees. My wife and I attended the first event, which was August 2001. There was about 20 delegates there. I don't know how many paid the £5,000, but basically Jim had proved the concept, and then he went on to scale the business. I think they did about $1 million or more in the first 12 months. So from a standing start, 2001 to maybe 05, 06, they were doing about 30 million. Jim was telling me he was lining up for a private equity exit. But he stayed, from what I understand, he stayed too long with that business. He should have exited earlier, is my view, because of course the credit crunch changed everything. All the rules changed. So currently, as I mentioned earlier, my focus is really working with maybe 8 or 10 entrepreneurs. Dave is one of them, working closely with them, really to add extra value, extra revenues, using a very simple process. And I mentioned it earlier, which is my speciality, as you already gathered, is not as a speaker or presenter or whatever, but is really progressing and securing more deals via more dialogues. So that's, I would say, if you know, they took people like Stephen Covey and these guys talk about begin with the end in mind, and they have this gravestone exercise. What would you want inscripted? I don't have the exact phrase, but it'd be something like progressing more dialogues, or a variation of that is my speciality. Much of this is explained in detail, more detail than I'm going to go into here, thankfully, but in this report. And it's not about being a jet broker, if you get excited about jets or whatever, but the essence of it is how to do more bigger deals, and that's explained in literally word by word, word for word, including the type of words to use, the scripts and so on, to make contact with high net worth individuals to open up bigger opportunities. These have been some of my previous mistakes, I admit it. More time, I've been able to get more time, so that's one of my examples of getting margin. I've been able to get more time, which then led to more distractions, whether it's partying or going out or restaurants, hotels, travel and all this kind of stuff. Did it all, so I don't have a big bucket list anymore. And more money leads to more distractions. I'll show you one example of that. And really, it's the downside, which very few people admit, but the comfort zone. You want to do less and less, especially when you kind of not get to the nth degree, but you're refining margin and leverage. Some of you may be experiencing this in property. You kind of get into wanting to be more passive, possibly, and still want to do deals, but you've got to still find a way. But one of the core things I found that helps is setting a next bigger goal. How many of you are doing that, or wherever you're at the moment? If you set a bigger goal, good. That's maybe 40% of you. That's really good. This is one of my distractions, by the way. It's a bit ugly. You recognize it, right?
Train spotting.
Close.
It's a fly log.
Yeah, it's a logbook.
Yeah.
Of my private pilot's license. I did complete it. As soon as I finished flying lessons, by the way, and I took about 100 hours. I wasn't one of the fast ones. So that's basically a logbook of all my flying lessons. So I call it a distraction because as I think back, I paid the best part of 10 grand to do it, logging up all this. You can see all the little entries, the little time logs and so on. But looking back, there wasn't really any gain in it. No real financial gain, other than like personal development maybe, but not no real gain. And as I say, I call it a distraction. And you have like more money, more time, and so on. Because as you already know, each time you fly for an hour, especially when I don't know if you can think back, when you go flying for an hour, how much time do you need to book out?
For me, right
2
now,
days.
3 hours outside.
There you go.
Of an hour.
Yeah, so it's quite time intensive. The 10 grand becomes small by comparison. You can make that back, but the time, 100 hours it took me the best part of a year to get through that. Again, I did it the slow way, as you gathered.
You did
But
it at
this-
Booker, did you?
Say again?
Booker Airfield.
Absolutely, yeah.
I did mine at Blackbush, so I used to.
High Wycombe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it took it. I used to live in central London at the time, so it was a 1 hour journey just to get to Booker. But this is one of my high points. And you would know this. It's a tiny entry here, which is this one here. It says P1.
P1, yeah.
In command. That was my first entry there. What does P1 mean?
Pilot in command.
Yeah. Now, it might not be a big deal to you, but that was my first solo flight
Yeah.
in a small plane. And it was
Frightening, isn't it?
Say again?
It's frightening, isn't it?
Yeah,
Even
but-
my solo, yeah.
You're right, you're way out of your comfort zone, but it was I could still feel it. It was like a tremendous high, because you're flying this thing. It was like 2-seater, 4-seater, whatever. Not one of your kind of jets. But you get a tremendous buzz because you're in command of this thing, and whatever goes wrong, you've got to deal with it up in the air at 1,000 feet. There was 0.3 of an hour, so it's like 20 minutes, and then back onto the runway.
Touch and goes, yeah.
This is I call it a near miss. So I didn't make a million or two from this. This, I openly admit, this is one deal where I slipped up. Townhouse at Mayfair, you see, sorry, not Mayfair, Marylebone, selling at maybe 700 grand. That was within reach. I know many of you guys have opportunities that have slipped by. Is that right? You're kind of close to it, but you didn't go for it. How many of you, by the way, have you let a big opportunity slip, where with a bit of a stretch you could have got it or done the deal? So I admit it here. I had excess cash flow to pay whatever the mortgage would be on that thing, on that property thing. My wife would have loved it. She loves central London. And the deposit I could have got at a stretch, I think it was maybe 100, maybe 150, 120K from memory. But I let it go. I let it slip. Probably, what do you think was the thing that the reason I didn't do it? What's one or two points that come to mind?
Fear.
Yeah.
Fear, yeah.
Fear.
Yeah, anxiety. But fear, yeah, absolute biggest. Any others?
You had another distraction. You had something else you were doing that you wanted to do.
Yeah, I was running a business as well, which was making 6 figures itself. That's why I had decent cash flow anyway. So I could have done that bit. But absolutely fear, I thought, a 700K transaction, it was like a big amount in those days. And you know the rest of the story anyway. I didn't go for it, I let it go. I stayed focused on what I was doing, which was making good income anyway. It was working nicely. It was an internet-based business. And well, you see the upshot or downshots of that. Walked away from $1 million or $2 million in gain during that boom. So one of the things I realized is that making excuses is very easy to do, but it becomes very, very expensive over time, whether in business or property. It's very easy to do. And like you say, fear, in my case, sometimes anxiety takes over. You kind of think of so many reasons or reasons you're uncomfortable with it, but if you somehow break through that, as you've done, like you're going for the castle experience, you're going to be challenged, as you already know. But as you make that move, you find like another point of growth. And in brief, this is what's really helped me in achieving about 60 goals over the years. How many of you guys use elements of these, either some of these or all of these? All right. Just out of interest, am I missing anything there? So some ways you guys have achieved goals before using anything else beyond this. Am I missing anything?
Commitment.
Good.
You have to action. You have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, the why, isn't it?
I think actually writing them down, that's the most important.
Writing the goal down.
Yeah,
I agree
down.
with you.
You can,
Now,
you
jump
can
straight
talk
to
about
visualization.
it. You can talk about it, and instead of actually writing it down, that's the most important.
Yeah. Yeah, writing, absolutely crucial. I even missed that out because I kind of do it naturally anyway. I've got it written down here in terms of my main goals. But I go straight to constantly visualizing the end goal and what I want and how it's going to come together. I know Dan is a big fan of that, isn't he? Being very clear. In that guy, Dan Pennia's case, he visualized obtaining a castle on an island many years before he obtained it. And he, as he said, he relates the story much better. But when he secured Guthrie Castle in 1984, he said, I achieved everything I wanted because it turns out Great Britain is an island. And that's what he'd see, what he'd visualized. And I know I've mentioned this a few times before, but I know a lot of the gurus talk and experts talk about taking action. For myself, the one core action that's led to the most results, rewards, income, and pretty much most of the things I've done is dialogues.
I think I need to change that a little bit.
Sure.
Taking massive action. I think what Tony, I think you know what I'm talking
Tony
about.
Robbins.
Tony Robbins says that. And another guy I just recently came across. Probably some of you guys must already know about it. Grant. Is it? Cardone. He talks about taking massive action as well.
Yeah,
so I think
I agree with you.
just taking action. I don't think it
This guy,
doesn't.
Cardone.
Yeah, times 10 rule. Yeah.
10x rule.
Yeah.
I'm not advertising this book. Buy 10 of these. Yeah, great book. And obviously there's literally hundreds of those, books, tapes, videos, and as I mentioned earlier, there's tons of resources. But this has been key, certainly for myself and with Dave, and most of the other individuals I know, which is more dialogues, because I know it sounds simple, but dialogues lead to deals. So very briefly, the how. You okay for time?
Yeah, we are getting a bit pushed.
All right.
Yeah.
So who'd like to know, very briefly, let's take a quick poll. Who'd like to know a bit more about how to achieve most of your goals, or we can shift over to the how-tos with Dave on the property broking side. Quick show of hands, more about achieving all your goals or your main goals, quick show of hands, or the property broking and the steps to do that. More hands for property broking. So,
Yeah, a little bit.
good. They want to change the scenery.
Yeah.
As I say that, I'll just finish off on this point. The how-tos, from my experience, is only the core 20%. We've been through all this, we've got too much information and everything else. A quick guess, what's the other 80%?
Distraction. Taking action. Distraction.
Distract. No, that's not the other 80%. I'm talking about achieving a goal. So say you want to make an extra, say 50 grand or $500,000, well, whatever the goal is, the how-to is, I'm saying, is only 20% of the
why.
solution.
Why? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, did everyone hear that? The why you want to do it. Which was possibly the reason I didn't do the 700 grand deal in Marylebone. I didn't have a strong enough why. There wasn't really a strong drive for me to want to do it. Now there definitely isn't. So I'm interested in other things. But as I say, there's tons of information, tons of resources, and the obviously Dave will go through much of the process of doing more property deals, but you'll find that quite a few elements of this come into it. If you guys want to know more about how to get to point B, because I call it achieve more of your goals, then we can touch on that a bit later. But Mark, what would you say are the main points you picked out of today's session?
Well, for me, I think the important things that have come across are, first of all, there are people doing it, blazing the trail. The fact that you and David are both out there walking the talk, so to speak. So for me, you know, having that inspiration, the fact that you guys are role models in terms of what can be achieved, the whole mindset, goal setting session was fantastic, but then of course the practical application as well, the case studies, you know, real life examples of how these kinds of deals can be structured has definitely given me the belief and conviction that I can do it for myself as well.
And do you see multiple ways of doing bigger deals, possibly 5-figure, 6-figure?
Oh, definitely. I mean, certainly, you know, once you understand that leverage is important, margin and leverage, and then understanding the principles to actually apply that makes a huge difference. Already I can see my income projection for the next 12 months increasing tenfold.
Great. And what would you say are going forward, what are 2 or 3 points you're likely to work on or focus on going forward?
Mainly, yeah, I've already decided for myself I'm going to focus on the international property brokering side of the equation. That partly because I've had a background, I've been 3 feet away from the goal before, and you know, this session has really made me realise that it's about breaking through and continuing the momentum. And having the mechanics to be able to do that. So yeah, that's definitely one thing that I'm going to be focusing on.
Now, just a brief question. If you were to put a financial value on today, even a ballpark figure, what could you say it's been worth?
Oh, practical application of the principles from today, easily 100k plus. So yeah, 6 figures easy.
Wow, so we undercharged.
Definitely.
Great. Just a final point. Do you have any kind of final points to add about what we could either improve or change or add to the content?
In terms of improvements, I would say, I mean, the property case studies were fantastic and numerous, which was great. It would have been nice to have some case studies of some of the other things like the jet brokerage or supercars or whatever, just a little bit more there. But on the whole, I think fantastic. And maybe you should have done a value check at the end of the day. You know, asked everybody, I guess you're asking us individually what we think this would be worth if we applied the principles. But yeah, maybe a group value check as well.
Great, thank you, Mark.
Pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks for coming today. I know you've driven quite a distance. What would you say have been some of the more valuable parts of what we've covered today for yourself? What have been the most useful and more valuable?
I think it was valuable, I would say. I mean, all this very informative here. What I like about here is the friendliness and then openness and then you know, explaining about the ways of how to get you know, property deals and how to get the financial goals, and how to achieve your financial goals. And I find it really very impressive, very friendly, very sort of. It's not like a seminar. It's more like a friendly conversation.
Great. Now, I know you've had quite a bit of success already in property. What would you say that this has done to your goals going forward? How has it helped clarify your goals going forward?
I think it gives a better vision, you know. It gives a sort of better vision, what you could do, what you could achieve, and what to do to achieve it, who to talk, you know, who to ask. All this really I find it very informative. I mean, I've been some of the courses, but or the seminars, this is really very different. I find it very different, very sort of more intimate and more honest. And
Great. We're always looking to improve it. So, would you have any suggestions, even one or two suggestions, to possibly improve anything or add content or anything that we may have missed?
To be honest, I don't really think at the moment that you can improve. I'm really happy with the outcome. It's well worth coming and well worth spending time, and I'm definitely thinking it's very useful for my future property deals as well. And the booklet you have given, and in the future as well, I'd like to keep contact as well with you and Dave. And I think two different things is sort of represent here: how you can achieve and the practical way through Dave, what you could do. So basically, it's two important factors. It's been really well handled, I think.
It's been good having you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight, Mohammed. It's been good to meet you. What would you say have been some of the more valuable or useful parts you picked up from the workshop today?
Yeah, from David's side, idea of international property brokerage sound quite interesting. Some really good principles, some really good pointers, and from Des's side, I found it even more interesting. Personal development, looking into how to communicate even better with the people. Like you said, dialogue. We hear about it all the time, but to understand it, and that kind of helped me. I'm looking at it from a different point of view now, different kind of angle.
Great. And has it helped you with a few more ways to achieve your goals, whether property or business goals?
Oh, definitely. It's kind of a small eye opener. I'm just wondering if the preview is like this, or the whole proper stuff is, what's the proper stuff is going to be like. So that makes me even more interested in this.
Good. And if you were to put any kind of value on the workshop and the content today, the material we covered, would you be able to put any figure on it?
Well, I would. I don't know whether how my estimate would sound, but I would easily put it between 500 to 1,000 pounds easily comparing to what's happening in the market. Some of the events which are being sold, which are, I have to say, hard sell page. And in this event, you don't even feel that there is a hard sell page. The good thing is, this is a kind of stuff where people eventually want to ask you, okay, what next? What next? This is the kind of thing, and I'm really happy I attended. It is a Saturday, and I think it's a time well spent. It's a good investment time-wise. Money-wise, we literally pay nothing. 19 pounds. That's all I paid. You don't get much for it, but time spent, very well spent.
Thanks, Mohammed. One final question. If there was any way we could possibly improve anything, content or knowledge or anything else, is there anything we missed? Time was tight.
Yeah, time was tight. Preview. You did more than what you could have been done in 2-3 hours. Trying to. There were 2 speakers. Yeah. I think you've done very well. The only thing is, for the people. For the people who are happy with the content, a way forward for them. Maybe a follow-up. I'm sure there will be a follow-up. Or maybe, because those people who want to get involved, maybe from the basics, like I've been involved to property for quite some time. And the other side of, your side of the stuff, I'm interested in that as well. It's kind of a catch-22, which one to do first. The reason, like I said before, the reason why to do the property stuff first is to get to a certain level. Then, okay, I can afford to pay out a bit more money on the on Desi store.
Great.
That's what my but I really find it good value, and it's the best time spent of a Saturday, 2-3 hours. There were a couple of hours travel as well, but it's well worth it.
That's great. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you.